Okay, that should about do it. Alrighty. Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Storytime Saturdays. I'll be your narrator for today, Fragath. And let me just get this up and running here. Double check, make sure things are coming through. They sure are. Very good. All right. Here we go. It's taking a while to load my list of short stories here, so give me a moment. I apologize. I apologize. Here we go. No, fine. That's interesting. It just stopped loading the list, and now what's it doing? It's reloading the list, I think. Okay. This is very unusual behavior. Hmm. Hmm. I have a backup. Ah, there we go. Weird. Okay. Fine. I should probably check into that. Whatever. Here it is. Our first tale of the day. And we will take it from there. This one is called... No, it's not The Puppet Masters by Robert A. Heinlein. Here we go. If You Was a Mocklin by Murray Leinster. Let me find where the copyright date is. There we go. Galaxy Science Fiction, September of 1951. The 50s, they were a pretty great decade for this stuff. They were a fantastic decade for this stuff. Um, so much of it from that time period in the 60s. Uh, Here we go. Let's get to the title page here. Here we go. Without further ado, If You Was a Mocklin by Murray Leinster. If you was a Mocklin, you'd love Earthmen to pieces, for they may look pretty bad to themselves, but not to you. You'd even want to be one. Up to the very last minute, I can't imagine that Mocklin is going to be the first planet that humans get off of, moving fast, breathing hard, and sweating awful copious. There ain't any reason for it. Humans have been on Mocklin for more than 40 years, and nobody ever figures there's anything the least bit wrong until Brooks works it out. When he does, nobody can believe it. But it turns out bad. Plenty bad. But maybe things are working out all right now. Maybe. I hope so. At first, even after he's sent off long reports by 6 ships in a row, I don't see the picture beginning to turn sour. I don't get it until after the old Palmyra comes and squats down on the next to the last trip a company ship is ever going to make to Mocklin. Up to that very morning, everything is serene. And that morning, I am sitting on the trading post porch, not doing a thing, but sitting there and breathing happy. I'm looking at a Mocklin kid. She's about the size of a human 6-year-old, and she is playing in a mud puddle while her folks are trading in the post. She's a cute kid, mighty human looking. She has long whiskers like Old Man Bland, who's the first human to open a trading post and learn to talk to the Mocklins. Mocklins think a lot of Old Man Bland. They build him a big tomb, Mocklin style, when he dies, and there is more Mocklin kids born with long whiskers than you can shake a stick at. And everything looks okay. Everything. Sitting there on the porch, I hear a Mocklin talking inside the trade room, talking English just as good as anybody. He says to Deeth, our Mocklin trade clerk,
But Deeth, I can buy this cheaper over at the other trading post. Why should I pay more here?
Deeth says, in English too, I can't help that. That's the price here. You pay it or you don't. That's all. I just sit there, breathing complacent, thinking how good things are. Here I'm Joe Brinkley, and me and Brooks and the company on Mocklin, only humans rate as company employees and get pensions, of course. And I'm thinking sentimental about how much humaner Mocklins are getting every day and how swell everything is. The 6-year-old kid gets up out of the mud puddle and wrings out her whiskers. They are exactly like the ones on the picture of Old Man Bland in the trade room, and she goes off trotting down the road after her folks. She is mighty human looking, that one. The wild ones don't look near so human. Those that live in the forest are greenish and have saucer eyes, and their noses can wiggle like an earth rabbit. You wouldn't think they're the same breed as the trading post Mocklins at all, but they are. They crossbreed with each other, only the kids look humaner than their parents and are mighty near the same skin color as Earthmen, which is plenty natural when you think about it, but nobody does. Not up to then. I don't think about that then, or anything else. Not even about the reports Brooks keeps sweating over and sending off with every company ship. I'm just sitting there contented when I notice that Sally, the tree that shades the trading post porch, starts pulling up her roots. She gets them coiled careful and starts marching off. I see the other trees are moving off too, clearing the landing field. They're waddling away to leave a free space, and they're pushing and shoving, trying to crowd each other. And little ones sneak under the big ones, and they act all peevish. Somehow, they know a ship is coming in. That's what their walking off means, anyhow. But there ain't a ship due in for a month yet. They're clearing the landing field, though, so I start listening for a ship's drive, even if I don't believe it. At first, I don't hear a thing. It must be 10 minutes before I hear a thin whistle, and right after, the heavy drone that's the ground repulsor units pushing against bedrock underground. Lucky they don't push on wet stuff, or a ship would sure mess up the local countryside. I get off my chair and go out to look. Sure enough, the old Palmyra comes bulging down out of the sky, a month ahead of schedule, and the trees over at the edge of the field shove each other all round to make room. The ship drops, hangs anxious 10 feet up, and then kind of sighs and lets down. Then there's Mocklins running out of everywhere, waving cordial. They sure do like humans, these Mocklins. Humans are their idea of what people should be like. Mocklins will wrestle the freight over to the trading post while others are climbing over everything that's waiting to go off, all set to pass it up to the ship and hoping to spot friends they've made in the crew. If they can get a human to go home with them and visit while the ship is down, they brag about it for weeks. And do they treat their guests well? They got fancy Mocklin clothes for them to wear, soft, silky guest garments. And they got Mocklin fruits and Mocklin drinks. You ought to taste them. And when the humans have to go back to the ship at takeoff time, the Mocklins bring them back with flower wreaths all over them. Humans is tops on Mocklin, and Mocklins get humaner every day. There's Deeth, our clerk. You couldn't hardly tell him from human, anyways. He looks like a human named Casey that used to be at the trading post, and he's got a flock of brothers and sisters as human looking as he is. You'd swear. But this is the last time but one that an Earth ship is going to land on Mocklin, though nobody knows it yet. Her passenger port opens up and Captain Haney gets out. The Mocklins yell cheerful when they see him. He waves a hand and helps a human girl out. She has red hair and a sort of businesslike air about her. The Mocklins wave and holler and grin. The girl looks at them funny, and Cap Haney explains something, but she sets her lips. Then the Mocklins run out a freight truck, and Haney and the girl get on it, and they come racing over to the post, the Mocklins pushing and pulling them and making a big fuss of laughing and hollering. All so friendly, it would make anybody feel good inside. Mocklins like humans. They admire them tremendous. They do everything they can think of to be human, and they're smart. But sometimes I get cold shivers when I think how close a thing it turns out to be. Cap Haney steps off the freight truck and helps the girl down. Her eyes are blazing. She is the maddest looking female I ever see, but pretty as they make them, with that red hair and those blue eyes staring at me hostile. "Hiya, Joe," says Cap Haney. "Where's Brooks?" I tell him. Brooks is poking around in the mountains up back of the post. He is jumpy and worried and peevish, and he acts like he's trying to find something that ain't there, but he's going to find it, regardless. "Too bad he's not here," says Haney. He turns to the girl. "This is Joe Brinkley," he says. "He's Brooks's assistant. And, Joe, this is Inspector Caldwell. Miss Caldwell."
Inspector will do, says the girl, curt.
She looks at me accusing.
I'm here to check into this matter of a competitive trading post on Mocklin.
"Oh," I says, "that's bad business. But it ain't cut into our trade much. In fact, I don't think it's cut our trade at all."
Get my baggage ashore, Captain, says Inspector Caldwell, imperious. Then you can go about your business. I'll stay here until you stop on your return trip.
I call, "Hey, Deeth!" but he's right behind me. He looks respectful and admiring at the girl. You'd swear he's human. He's the spittin' image of Casey, who used to be on Mocklin until 6 years back. "Yes, sir," says Deeth. He says to the girl, "Yes, ma'am, I'll show you your quarters, ma'am, and your baggage will get there right away. This way, ma'am." He leads her off, but he don't have to send for her baggage. A pack of Mocklins come along, dragging it, hopeful of having her say thank you to them for it. There hasn't ever been a human woman on Mocklin before, and they are all excited. I bet if there had been women around before, there'd have been hell loose before, too. But now the Mocklins just hang around, admiring. There are kids with whiskers like Old Man Bland, and other kids with mustaches, male and female both, and all that sort of stuff. I'm pointing out to Cap Haney some kids that bear a remarkable resemblance to him, and he's saying, "Well, what do you know?" when Inspector Caldwell comes back.
What are you waiting for, Captain? She asks, frosty.
"The ship usually grounds a few hours," I explain. "These Mocklins are such friendly critters, we figure it makes good will for the trading post for the crew to be friendly with 'em."
"I doubt," says Inspector Caldwell, her voice dripping icicles, "that I shall advise that that custom be continued."
Cap Haney shrugs his shoulders and goes off, so I know Inspector Caldwell is high up in the company. She ain't old, maybe in her middle 20s, I'd say, but the Caldwell family practically owns the company, and all the nephews and cousins and so on get put into a special school so they can go to work in the family firm. They get taught pretty good, and most of them really rate the good jobs they get. However, there's plenty of good jobs. The company runs 20 or 30 solar systems, and it's run pretty tight. Being a Caldwell means you get breaks, but you got to live up to them. Cap Haney almost has to fight his way through the Mocklins who want to give him flowers and fruits and such. Mocklins are sure crazy about humans. He gets to the entry port and goes in, and the door closes and the Mocklins pull back. Then the Palmyra blooms. The ground repulsor unit is on. She heaves up, like she is grunting, and goes bulging up into the air, and the humming gets deeper and deeper and fainter, and suddenly there's a keen whistling and she's gone. It's all very normal. Nobody would guess that this is the last time but one Earth ship will ever lift off Mauchline. Inspector Caldwell taps her foot, icy. When will you send for Mr. Brooks? She demands. Right away, I says to her. Deeth. I sent a runner for him, ma'am, says Deeth. If he was in hearing of the ship's landing, he may be on the way here now. He bows and goes in the trade room. There are Mocklins that came to see the ship land, and now have tramped over to do some trading. Inspector Caldwell jumps. What's that? She asks, tense. The trees that crowded off the field to make room for the Palmyra are waddling back. I realize for the first time that it might look funny to somebody just landed on Mauchline. They are regular looking trees, in a way. They got bark and branches and so on. Only they can put their roots down into holes they make in the ground, and that's the way they stay, mostly. But they can move. Wild ones, when there's a water shortage or they get too crowded or mad with each other, they pull up their roots and go waddling around looking for a better place to take root in. The trees on our landing field have learned that every so often a ship is going to land, and they've got to make room for it. But now the ship is gone, and they're lurching back to their places. The younger ones are waddling faster than the big ones, though, and taking the best places, and the old grunting trees are waving their branches indignant and puffing after them mad as hell. I explain what is happening. Inspector Caldwell just stares. Then Sally comes lumbering up. I got a friendly feeling for Sally. She's pretty old. Her trunk is all of 3 feet thick. But she always puts out a branch to shade my window in the morning, and I never let any other tree take her place. She comes groaning up and uncoils her roots and sticks them down one by one into the holes she'd left and sort of scrunches into place and looks peaceful. Aren't they dangerous? Asks Inspector Caldwell, pretty uneasy. Not a bit, I says. Things can change on Mauchline. They don't have to fight. Things fight in other places because they can't change and they get crowded, and that's the only way they can meet competition. But there's a special kind of evolution on Mauchline. Cooperative, you might call it. It's a nice place to live. Only thing is, everything matures so fast. 4 years and a Mauchline has grown up, for instance. She sniffs. What about that other trading post? She asks sharp. Who's back of it? The company is supposed to have exclusive trading rights here. Who's trespassing? Brooks is trying to find out, I says. They got a good complete line of trade goods, but the Mocklins always say the humans running the place have gone off somewhere, hunting and such. We ain't seen any of 'em. No, says the girl short. I'll see them. We can't have competition in our exclusive territory. The rest of Mr. Brooks's reports. She stops. Then she says, that clerk of yours reminds me of someone I know. He's a Mocklin, I explain, but he looks like a company man named Casey. Casey's area director over on Katim too now, but he used to be here, and the Deeth is the spittin' image of him. Outrageous, says Inspector Caldwell, looking disgusted. There's a couple of trees pushing hard at each other. They are fightin', tree fashion, for a specially good place, and there's others waddling around mad as hell because somebody else beat them to the spots they liked. I watch them. Then I grin because a couple of young trees duck under the fighting big ones and set their roots down in the place the big trees was fighting over. I don't like your attitude, says Inspector Caldwell, furious. She goes stamping into the post, leaving me puzzled. What's wrong with me smiling at those kid trees getting the best of their betters? That afternoon, Brooks comes back, marching ahead of a pack of woods Mocklins with greenish skins and saucer eyes that have been guiding him around. He's a good-looking kind of fellow, Brooks is, with a good build and a solid jaw. When he comes out of the woods on the landing field, and the trees are all settled down by then, he's striding impatient and loose-jointed. With the woods Mocklins trailing him, he looks plenty dramatic, like a vis-a-real picture of an explorer on some unknown planet, coming back from the dark and perilous forests, followed by the strange natives who do not yet know whether this visitor from outer space is a god or what. You know the stuff. I see Inspector Caldwell take a good look at him, and I see her eyes widen. She looks like he is a shock and not a painful one. He blinks when he sees her. He grunts. What's this? A she-mocklin? Inspector Caldwell draws herself up, her full 5'3". She bristles. I say quick, this here is Inspector Caldwell that the Palmyra dumped off here today. Inspector, this is Brooks, the head trader. They shake hands. He looks at her and says, I'd lost hope my reports would ever get any attention paid to them. You've come to check my report that the trading post on Mocklin has to be abandoned?
I have not, says Inspector Caldwell, sharp. That's absurd. This planet has great potentialities. This post is profitable and the natives are friendly, and the trade should continue to increase. The board is even considering the introduction of special crops.
That strikes me as a bright idea. I'd like to see what would happen if Mocklin started cultivating new kinds of plants. It would be a thing to watch, with regular Mocklin plants seeing strangers getting good at growing places and special attention. I can't even guess what'll happen, but I want to watch.
What I want to ask right off, says Inspector Caldwell, fierce, is why you have allowed a competitive trading post to be established, why you did not report it sooner, and why you haven't identified the company back of it.
Brooks stares at her. He gets mad.
Hell, he says, my reports cover all that. Haven't you read them?
Of course not, says Inspector Caldwell. I was given an outline of the situation here and told to investigate and correct it.
Oh, says Brooks, that's it.
Then he looks like he's swallowing naughty words. It is funny to see them glare at each other, both of them looking like they are seeing something that interests them plenty, but throwing off angry sparks just the same.
If you show me samples of their trade goods, says Inspector Caldwell, arrogant, and I hope you can do that much, I'll identify the trading company handling them.
He grins at her without amusement and leads the way to the inside of the trading post. We bring out the stuff we've had some of our Mocklins go over and buy for us. Brooks dumps the goods on a table and stands back to see what she'll make of them, grinning with the same lack of mirth. She picks up a visireel projector. She says, scornful. Not very good quality. It's... Then she stops. She picks up a forest knife. This, she says, is a product of... Then she stops again. She picks up some cloth and fingers it. She really steams.
I see, she says, angry. Because we have been on this planet so long and the Mocklins are used to our goods, the people of the other trading post duplicate them. Do they cut prices?
50%, says Brooks. I chime in, but we ain't lost much trade. Lots of Mocklins still trade with us, out of friendship. Friendly folks, these Mocklins. Just then Deeth comes in, looking just like Casey that used to be here on Mocklin. He grins at me. A girl just brought you a compliment, he lets me know. Shucks, I says, embarrassed and pleased. Send her in and get a present for her. Deeth goes out. Inspector Caldwell hasn't noticed. She's seething over that other trading company, copying our trade goods and underselling us on a planet we're supposed to have exclusive. Brooks looks at her grim. I shall look over their post, she announces, fierce. And if they want a trade war, they'll get one. We can cut prices if we need to. We have all the resources of the company behind us. Brooks seems to be steaming on his own, maybe because she hasn't read his reports. But just then a Mocklin girl comes in. Not bad looking either. You can see she is a Mocklin. She ain't as convincing human as Deeth is, say, but she looks pretty human at that. She giggles at me. Compliment, she says, and shows me what she's carrying. I look. It's a Mocklin kid, a boy, just about brand new. And it has my shape ears, and its nose looks like somebody had stepped on it. My nose is that way. And it looks like a very small-sized working model of me. I chuck it under the chin and say, Kitchikoo. It gurgles at me. What's your name? I ask the girl. She tells me. I don't remember it, and I don't remember ever seeing her before, but she paid me a compliment all right. Mocklin style. Mighty nice, I say. Cute as all get out. I hope he grows up to have more sense than I got, though. Then Deeth comes in with an armload of trade stuff, like old man Bland gave to the first Mocklin kid that was born with long whiskers like his, and I say, "Thanks for the compliment. I am greatly honored." She takes the stuff and giggles again, and goes out. The kid beams at me over her shoulder and waves its fist. Mighty human like. A right cute kid, any way you look at it. Then I hear a noise. Inspector Caldwell is regarding me with loathing in her eyes. "Did you say they were friendly creatures?" she asks, bitter. "I think affectionate would be a better word." Her voice shakes. "You are going to be transferred out of here the instant the Palmyra gets back." "What's the matter?" I ask, surprised. "She paid me a compliment, and I gave her a present. It's a custom. She's satisfied. I never see her before that I remember." "You don't?" she says. "The the callousness! You're revolting." Brooks begins to sputter. Then he snickers. And all of a sudden he's howling with laughter. He is laughing at Inspector Caldwell. Then I get it, and I snort. Then I hoot and holler. It gets funnier when she gets madder still. She near blows up from being mad. We must look crazy, the two of us there in the post, just hollering with laughter while she gets furiouser and furiouser. Finally, I have to lay down on the floor to laugh more comfortable. You see, she doesn't get a bit of what I've told her about there being a special kind of evolution on Mocklin. The more disgusted and furious she looks at me, the harder I have to laugh. I can't help it. When we set out for the other trading post next day, the atmosphere ain't exactly what you'd call cordial. There's just the inspector and me, with Deeth and a couple of other Mocklins for the look of things. She has on a green forest suit, and with her red hair she looks good. But she looks at me cold when Brooks says I'll take her over to the other post, and she doesn't say a word for the first mile or two. We trudge on, and presently Deeth and the others get ahead so they can't hear what she says. And she remarks, indignant, "I must say Mr. Brooks isn't very cooperative. Why didn't he come with me? Is he afraid of the men at the other post?" "Not him," I says. "He's a good guy. But you got authority over him, and you ain't read his reports." "If I have authority," she says, sharp, "I assure you it's because I'm competent." "I don't doubt it," I says. "If you wasn't cute he wouldn't care. But a man don't want a good-looking girl giving him orders. He wants to give them to her. A homely woman, it don't matter." She tosses her head, but it don't displease her. Then she says, "What's in the reports that I should have read?" "I don't know," I admit, "but he's been sweating over them. It makes him mad that nobody bothered to read 'em." "Maybe," she guesses, "it was what I need to know about this other trading post." "What do you know about it, Mr. Brinkley?" I tell her what Deeth has told Brooks. Brooks found out about it because one day some Mocklins come in to trade and ask friendly why we charge so much for this and that. Deeth told them we'd always charged that, and they say the other trading post sells things cheaper. And Deeth says, "What trading post?" So they up and tell him there's another post that sells the same kind of things we do, only cheaper. But that's all they'll say. So Brooks tells Deeth to find out, and he scouts around and comes back. There's another trading post only 15 miles away, and it is selling stuff just like ours. And it charges only half price. Deeth didn't see the men, just the Mocklin clerks. We ain't been able to see the men either. Why haven't you seen the men? Every time Brooks or me go over, I explain, the Mocklins they got working for them say the other men are off somewhere. Maybe they're starting some more posts. We wrote 'em a note asking what the hell they mean, but they never answered it. Of course, we ain't seen their books or their living quarters. "You could find out plenty by a glimpse at their books," she snaps. "Why haven't you just marched in and made the Mocklins show you what you want to know since the men were away?" "Because," I says, patient, "Mocklins imitate humans. If we start trouble, they'll start it too. We can't set an example of rough stuff like burglary, mayhem, breaking and entering, manslaughter, or bigamy, or these Mocklins will do just like us." "Bigamy!" She grabs on that sardonic. "If you're trying to make me think you've got enough moral sense—" I get a little mad. Brooks and me, we've explained to her, careful, how it is admiration and the way evolution works on Mocklin that makes Mocklin kids get born with long whiskers, and that the compliment the Mocklin girl has paid me is just exactly that. But she hasn't listened to a word. Miss Caldwell, I says, Brooks and me told you the facts. We tried to tell them delicate to spare your feelings. Now, if you'll try to spare mine, I'll thank you. If you mean your finer feelings, she says, sarcastic, I'll spare them as soon as I find some. So I shut up. There's no use trying to argue with a woman. We tramp on through the forest without a word. Presently we come on to a nest bush. It's a pretty big one. There are a couple dozen nests on it, from the little bitty bud ones, no bigger than your fist, to the big ripe ones lined with soft stuff that have busted open and have got cacklebirds housekeeping in them now. There are two cacklebirds sitting on a branch by the nest that is big enough to open up and have eggs laid in it, only it ain't. The cacklebirds are making noises like they are cussing it and telling it to hurry up and open because they're in a hurry. That's a nest bush, I says. It grows nests for the cacklebirds. The birds fertilize the ground around it. They're sloppy feeders and drop a lot of stuff that rots and is fertilizer too. The nest bush and the cacklebirds kind of cooperate. That's the way evolution works on Mocklin, like Brooks and me told you. She tosses that red head of hers and stamps on, not saying a word. So we get to the other trading post, and there she gets one of these slow-burning, long-lasting mads on that'll fill a guy like me with awe. There's only Mocklins at the other trading post, as usual. They say the humans are off somewhere. They look at her admiring and polite. They show her their stock. It is practically identical with ours, only they admit that they've sold out of some items because their prices are low. They act most respectful and pleased to see her. But she don't learn a thing about where their stuff comes from or what company is horning in on Mocklin trade. And she looks at their head clerk and she burns and burns. When we get back, Brooks is sweating over memorandums he has made, getting another report ready for the next company ship. Inspector Caldwell marches into the trade room and gives orders in a controlled, venomous voice. Then she marches right in on Brooks. I have just ordered the Mocklin sales force to cut the price on all items on sale by 75%, she says, her voice trembling a little with fury. I have also ordered the credit given for Mocklin trade goods to be doubled. They want a trade war? They'll get it. She is a lot madder than business would account for. Brooks says, tired, I'd like to show you some facts. I've been over every inch of territory in 30 miles looking for a place where a ship could land for that other post. There isn't any. Does that mean anything to you? The post is there, isn't it? She says. And they have trade goods, haven't they? And we have exclusive trading rights on Mocklin, haven't we? That is enough for me. Our job is to drive them out of business. But she is a lot madder than business would account for. Brooks says, very weary, there's nearly a whole planet where they could have put another trading post. They could have set up shop on the other hemisphere and charged any price they pleased. But they set up shop right next to us. Does that make sense? Setting up close, she says, would furnish them with customers already used to human trade goods, and it furnished them with Mocklins trained to be interpreters and clerks. And then it come out what she's raging, boiling, steaming, burning up about. And, she says, furious, it furnished them with a Mocklin head clerk who is a very handsome young man, Mr. Brooks. He not only resembles you in every feature, but he even has a good many of your mannerisms. You should be very proud. With this, she slams out of the room. Brooks blinks. She won't believe anything, he says, sour, except only that man is vile. Is that true about a Mocklin who looks like me? I nod. Funny as folks never showed him to me for a compliment present. And he stares at me hard. How good is the likeness? If he is wearing your clothes, I tell him truthful, I'd swear he is you. Then Brooks, slow, very slow, turns white. Remember the time you went off with Deeth and his folks hunting? That was a time a Mocklin got killed. You were wearing guest garments, weren't you? I feel queer inside, but I nod. Guest garments, for Mocklins, are like the best bedroom and the drumstick of the chicken among humans. And a Mocklin hunting party is something. They go hunting Garlichthos, which you might as well call dragons because they've got scales and they fly and they are tough babies. The way to hunt them is you take along some cackle birds that ain't nesting. They're no good for anything while they're honeymooning, and the cackle birds go flapping around until a Garlichthos comes after them, and then they go jet streaking to where the hunters are, cackling a blue streak to say, "Here I come, boys, hold everything until I get past." Then the Garlichthos dives after them, and the hunters get it as it dives. You give the cacklebirds its innards, and they sit around and eat, cackling to each other, zestful, like they're bragging about the other times they done the same thing, only better. You were wearing guest garments, repeats Brooks, grim. I feel very queer inside, but I nod again. Mocklin guest garments are mighty easy on the skin and feel mighty good. They ain't exactly practical hunting clothes, but the Mocklins feel bad if a human that's their guest don't wear 'em. And of course, he has to shed his human clothes to wear them. What's the idea? I want to know, but I feel pretty unhappy inside. You didn't come back for one day in the middle of the hunt after a tobacco and a bath? No, I says, beginning to get rattled. We were way over at the Thunlib Hills. We buried the dead Mocklin over there and had a hell of a time building a tomb over him. Why? During that week, says Brooks, grim, and while you were off wearing Mocklin guest garments, somebody came back wearing your clothes, and got some tobacco and passed the time of day and went off again. Joe, just like there's a Mocklin you say could pass for me, there's one that could pass for you. In fact, he did. Nobody suspected either. I get panicky. But what did he do that for? I want to know. He didn't steal anything. Would he have done it just to brag to the other Mocklins that he fooled you? He might, says Brooks, have been checking to see if he could fool me, or Captain Haney of the Palmyra, or... He looks at me. I feel myself going numb. This can mean one hell of a mess. I haven't told you before, says Brooks, but I've been guessing at something like this. Mocklins like to be human, and they get human kids. Kids that look human, anyway. Maybe they can want to be smart like humans, and they are. He tries to grin, and can't. That rival trading post looked fishy to me right at the start. They're practicing with that. It shouldn't be there at all, but it is. You see? I feel weak and sick all over. This is a dangerous sort of thing. But I say, quick, if you mean they got Mocklins that could pass for you and me, and they're figuring to bump us off and take our places, I don't believe that. Mocklins like humans. They wouldn't harm humans for anything. Brooks don't pay any attention. He says, harsh, I've been trying to persuade the company that we've got to get out of here fast. And they send us this Inspector Caldwell, who's not only female, but a redhead to boot. All they think about is a competitive trading post, and all she sees is that we're a bunch of lascivious scoundrels, and since she's a woman, there is nothing that'll convince her otherwise. Then something hits me. It looks hopeful. She's the first human woman to land on Mocklin, and she has got red hair. It's the first red hair the Mocklins ever saw. Have we got time? He figures. Then he says, with luck, it ought to turn up. You've hit it. Then his expression sort of softens. If that happens, poor kid, she's going to take it hard. Women hate to be wrong, especially redheads. But that might be the saving of humanity when you think of it. I blink at him. He goes on, fierce. Look, I'm no Mocklin. You know that. But if there's a Mocklin that looks enough like me to take my place... You see? We got to think of Inspector Caldwell, anyhow. If you ever see me cross my fingers, you wiggle your little finger. Then I know it's you. And the other way about. Get it? You swear you'll watch over Inspector Caldwell? Sure, I say. Of course. I wiggle my little finger. He crosses his. It's a signal nobody but us two would know. I feel a lot better. Brooks goes off next morning, grim, to visit the other trading post and see the Mocklin that looks so much like him. Inspector Caldwell goes along, fierce, and I'm guessing it's to see the fireworks when Brooks sees his Mocklin double that she thinks is more than a coincidence. Which she is right, only not in the way she thinks. Before they go, Brooks crosses his fingers and looks at me significant. I wiggle my little finger back at him. They go off. I sit down in the shade of Sally and try to think things out. I'm all churned up inside and scared as hell. It's near 2 weeks to landing time when the old Palmyra ought to come bulging down out of the sky with a load of new trade goods. I think wistful about how swell everything has been on Mocklin up till now, and how Mocklins admire humans, and how friendly everything has been, and how it's a great compliment for Mocklins to want to be like humans, and to get like them, and how no Mocklin would ever dream of hurting a human, and how they imitate humans joyous and reverent and happy. Nice people, Mocklins. But the end of things is in sight. Liking humans has made Mocklins smart, but now there's been a slip-up. Mocklins will do anything to produce kids that look like humans. That's a compliment. But no human ever sees a Mocklin that's 4 or 5 years old and all grown up and looks so much like 'em that nobody can tell them apart. That ain't scheming. It's just that Mocklins like humans, but they're scared the humans might not like to see themselves in a sort of Mocklin mirror. So if they did that at all, they'd maybe keep it a secret, like children keep secrets from grown-ups. Mocklins are a lot like kids. You can't help liking them, but a human can get plenty panicky if he thinks what would happen if Mocklins get to passing for humans among humans, and want their kids to have top-grade brains and top-grade talents, and so on. I sweat sitting there. I can see the whole picture. Brooks is worrying about Mocklins loose among humans, outsmarting them as their kids grow up, being the big politicians, the bosses, the planetary pioneers, the prettiest girls, and the handsomest guys in the galaxy. Everything humans want to be themselves. Just thinking about it is enough to make any human feel like he's going nuts. But Brooks is also worrying about Inspector Caldwell, who is 5'3" and red-headed and cute as a bug's ear and riding for a bad fall. They come back from the trip to the other trading post. Inspector Caldwell is baffled and mad. Brooks is sweating and scared. He slips me the signal, and I wiggle my little finger back at him, just so I'll know he didn't get substituted for without Inspector Caldwell knowing it, and so he knows nothing happened to me while he was gone. They didn't see the Mocklin that looks like Brooks. They didn't get a bit of information we didn't have before, which is just about none at all. Things go on. Brooks and me are sweating it out until the Palmyra lets down out of the sky again, meanwhile praying for Inspector Caldwell to get her ears pinned back so proper steps can be taken, and every morning he crosses his fingers at me and I wiggle my little finger back at him, and he watches over Inspector Caldwell tender. The other trading post goes on, placid. They sell their stuff at half the price we sell ours for. So, on Inspector Caldwell's orders, we cut ours again to half what they sell theirs for. So they sell theirs for half what we sell ours for, so we sell ours for half what they sell theirs for, and so on. Meanwhile, we sweat. 3 days before the Palmyra is due, our goods are marked at just exactly 1% of what they was marked a month before, and the other trading post is selling them at half that. It looks like we are going to have to pay a bonus to Mocklins to take goods away for us to compete with the other trading post. Otherwise, everything looks normal on the surface. Mocklins hang around as usual, friendly and admiring. They'll hang around a couple days just to get a look at Inspector Caldwell, and they regard her respectful. Brooks looks grim. He is head over heels crazy about her now, and she knows it, and she rides him hard. She snaps at him, and he answers her patient and gentle. because he knows that that ah, because he knows that when what he hopes is going to happen, she is going to need him to comfort her. She has about wiped out our stock throwing bargain sales. Our shelves are almost bare, but the other trading post still has plenty of stock. Mr. Brooks, says Inspector Caldwell, bitter, at breakfast, will have to take most of the Palmyra's cargo to fill up our inventory. Maybe, he says, tender, and maybe not. But we've got to drive that other post out of business, she says, desperate. Then she breaks down. This is my first independent assignment. I've got to handle it successfully. He hesitates, but just then Death comes in. He beams friendly at Inspector Caldwell. A compliment for you, ma'am. 3 of them. She goggles at him. Brooks says, gentle, it's all right. Death, show them in and get some presents. Inspector Caldwell splutters, incredulous. But, don't be angry, says Brooks. They mean it as a compliment. It is, actually, you know. 3 Mocklin girls come in, giggling. They're not bad looking at all. They look as human as Death, but one of them has a long, droopy mustache like a mate of the Palmyra. That's because they hadn't ever seen a human woman before Inspector Caldwell come along. They sure have admired her, though, and Mocklin kids get born fast. Very fast. They show her what they're holding so proud and happy in their arms. They've got 3 little Mocklin kids, one apiece, and every one of them has red hair just like Inspector Caldwell, and every one of them is a girl that is the spittin' image of her. You would swear they are human babies, and you'd swear they are hers. But of course, they ain't. They make kid noises and wave their little fists. Inspector Caldwell is just plain paralyzed. She stares at them and goes red as fire and white as chalk, and she is speechless. So Brooks has to go do the honors. He admires the kids extravagant, and the Mocklin girls giggle and take the compliment presents Death brings in, and they go out happy. When the door closes, Inspector Caldwell wilts. Oh, she wails, it's true. You haven't, they can make their babies look like anybody they want. Brooks puts his arms around her and she begins to cry against his shoulder. He pats her and says, they've got a queer sort of evolution on Mocklin, darling. Babies here inherit desired characteristics. Not acquired characteristics, but desired ones. And what could be more desirable than you? I am blinking at them. He says to me, cold, will you kindly get the hell out of here and stay out? I come too. I says, just one precaution. I wiggle my finger. He crosses his fingers at me. Then, I says, since there's no chance of mistake, I'll leave you 2 together. And I do. The Palmyra booms down out of the sky 2 days later. We are all packed up. Inspector Caldwell is shaky, on the porch of the post, when Mocklins come hollering and waving friendly over from the landing field, pulling a freight truck with Cap Haney in it. I see other festive groups around members of the crew that, this being a scheduled stop, have been given ship leave for a couple hours to visit their Mocklin friends. I've got the usual cargo, begins Cap Haney. Don't discharge it, says Inspector Caldwell, firm. We are abandoning this post. I have authority, and Mr. Brooks has convinced me of the necessity for it. Please get our baggage to the ship. He gapes at her. The company don't like to give in to competition. There isn't any competition, says Inspector Caldwell. She gulps. Darling, you tell him, she says to Brooks. He says, lucid, she's right, Captain. The other trading post is purely a Mocklin enterprise. They like to do everything that humans do. Since humans were running a trading post, they opened one too. They bought goods from us and pretended to sell them at half price. And we cut our prices, and they bought more goods from us and pretended to sell at half the new prices. Some Mocklin or other must have thought it would be nice to be a smart businessman, so his kids would be smart businessmen. Too smart. We close up this post before Mocklins think of other things. He means, of course, that if Mocklins get loose from their home planet and pass as humans, their kids can maybe take over human civilization. Human nature couldn't take that, but it is something to be passed on to the high brass and not told around general. Better sound the emergency recall signal, says Inspector Caldwell, brisk. We go over to the ship, and the Palmyra lets go that wailing siren that'll carry over 20 miles. Any crew member in hearing is going to beat it back to the ship full speed. They come running from every which way, where they've been visiting their Mocklin friends. And then, all of a sudden, here comes a fellow wearing Mocklin guest garments, yelling, "Hey, wait! I ain't got my clothes!" And then there's what you might call a dead silence, because lined up for checkoff is another guy that comes running at the recall signal, and he is wearing ship's clothes, and you can see that him and the guy in Mocklin guest garments are exactly alike. Twins. Identical. The spittin' image of each other. And it is for sure that one of them is a Mocklin. But which? Cap Haney's eyes start to pop out of his head. But then the guy in Palmyra uniform grins and says, "Okay, I'm a Mocklin, but us Mocklins like humans so much, I thought it would be nice to make a trip to Earth and see more humans. My parents planned it 5 years ago and made me look like this wonderful human and hid me for this moment. But we would not want to make any difficulties for humans, so I have confessed, and I will leave the ship." He takes it as a joke on him. He talks English as good as anybody. I don't know how anybody could tell which was the human guy and which one was the Mocklin, but this Mocklin grins and steps down, and the other Mocklins admire him enormous for passing even a few minutes as a human amongst humans. We get away from there so fast, he is allowed to keep the human uniform. Mocklin is the first planet that humans ever get off of, moving fast, breathing hard, and sweating copious. It's one of those things that humans just can't take. Not that there's anything wrong with Mocklins. They're swell folks. They like humans. But humans just can't take the idea of Mocklins passing for human and being all the things humans want to be themselves. I think it's really a false alarm. I'll find out pretty soon. Inspector Caldwell and Brooks get married, and they go off to a post on Briareus 4, a swell place for a honeymoon if ever there was one, and I guess they are living happily ever after. Me, I go to the new job the company assigns me, telling me stern not to talk about Mocklin, which I don't, and the Space Patrol orders no human ship to land on Mocklin for any reason. But I've been saving money and worrying. I keep thinking of those 3 Mocklin kids that Inspector Caldwell knows she ain't the father of. Wait, what? Okay. That's just odd sentence structure, but we'll go with it. I worry about those kids. I hope nothing's happened to them. Mocklin kids grow up fast, like I told you. They'll be just about grown now. I'll tell you, I've bought me a little private space cruiser, small but good. I'm shoving off for Mocklin next week. If one of those 3 ain't married, I'm going to marry her, Mocklin style, and bring her to a human colony planet. We'll have some kids. I know just what I want my kids to be like. They'll have plenty of brains, top level brains, and the girls will be real good looking. But besides that, I've got to bring some other Mocklins out and start them passing for human too. Because my kids are going to need other Mocklins to marry, ain't they? It's not that I don't like humans. I do. If the fellow I look like, Joe Brinkley, hadn't got killed accidental on that hunting trip with Deeth, I never would have thought of taking his place and being Joe Brinkley. But you can't blame me for wanting to live among humans. Wouldn't you, if you was a Mocklin? And that was If You Was a Mocklin by Murray Leinster. Ah! Oh, gosh. Great googly moogly. Kind of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers from the perspective of the Body Snatchers. Incidentally, has that ever been done? If that has ever been done, I need somebody to send me information on that. I think that would be really cool, doing Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but from the perspective of the Snatchers of Bodies, as opposed to the humanity. Then we might finally learn what that whole screaming thing is all about, other than just general communication. Ah, well, it's a thought. All right, that one was cute. I liked that one. It was charming, yet it had a nice bit of oh snap, you know, right at the end. Nice twist at the end. It's dated, but it's also charming. I had another one here. Where did it go? Ba 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 da. Ah, here it is. There we go. Okay, moving right along. I'm going to take another. A common theme with some of these older ones is there's a certain sexist bent by any modern perspective, which is more a product of the times than it is any active malevolence on the part of the authors. Um, it's just how things were. No one's saying that they were better days. Things could have been better. But gosh, they had a lot of fun pulp. I'll give them that. Oh, yes. My categories. All right. Moving right along is creativity for cats. That's creativity with a K and cats with a K, like Kit Kat Bar, and creativity with a K, like creativity with a K. uh, by Fritz Lieber. And where is a date? Here we go. Galaxy magazine of from April of 1961. So about a decade after the story I last read, obviously by a different author. All right. So without further ado, Creativity for Cats by Fritz Lieber. They are the aliens among us, and their ways and wonders are stranger than extraterrestrials. Gummidge peered thoughtfully at the molten silver image of the sun in his little bowl of water on the floor inside the kitchen window. He knew from experience that it would make dark ghost suns swim in front of his eyes for a few moments, and that was mildly interesting. Then he slowly thrust his head out over the water, careful not to ruffle its surface by rough breathing, and stared down at the mirror cat, the Gummidge double, staring up at him. Gummidge had early discovered that water mirrors are very different from most glass mirrors. The scentless spirit world behind glass mirrors is an upright one, sharing our gravity system, its floor a continuation of the floor in the so-called real world. But the world in a water mirror has reverse gravity. One looks down into it, but the spirit doubles look up at one. In a way, water mirrors are holes or pits in the world. leading down to a spirit infinity or ghostly nadir. Gummidge had pondered as to whether, if he plunged into such a pit, he would be sustained by the spirit gravity or fall forever. It may well be that speculations of this sort account for the caution about swimming characteristic of most cats. There was at least one exception to the general rule. The looking glass on Kitty Come Here's dressing table also opened into the spirit world of reverse gravity, as Gummidge had discovered when he happened to look into it during one of the regular visits he made to the dressing table top, to enjoy the delightful flowery and musky odors emanating from the fragile bottles assembled there. But exceptions to general rules, as Gummidge knew well, are only doorways to further knowledge and finer classifications. The wind could not get into the spirit world below Kitty Come Here's looking glass, while one of the definitive characteristics of water mirrors is that movement can very easily enter the spirit world below them, rhythmically disturbing it throughout, producing the most surreal effects, and even reducing it to chaos. Such disturbances exist only in the spirit world, and are in no way a mirroring of anything in the real world. Gummidge knew that his paw did not change when it flicked the surface of the water, although the image of his paw burst into 100 flickering fragments. Both cats and primitive men first deduced that the world in a water mirror is a spirit world, because they saw that its inhabitants were easily blown apart by the wind, and must therefore be highly tenuous, though capable of regeneration. Gummidge mildly enjoyed creating rhythmic disturbances in the spirit worlds below water mirrors. He wished there were some way to bring their excitement and weird beauty into the real world. On this sunny day, when our story begins, the spirit world below the water mirror in his drinking bowl was particularly vivid and bright. Gummidge stared for a while longer at the Gummidge double, and then thrust down his tongue to quench his thirst. Curling it swiftly upward, it conveyed a splash of water into his mouth, and also flicked a single drop of water into the air before his nose. The sun struck the drop, and it flashed like a diamond. In fact, it seemed to Gummidge that for a moment he had juggled the sun on his tongue. He shook his head amazedly, and touched the side of the bowl with his paw. The bowl was brimful, and a few drops fell out. They also flashed like tiny suns as they fell. Gummidge had a fleeting vision, a momentary creative impulse, that was gone from his mind before he could seize it. He shook his head once more, backed away from the bowl, and then lay down with his head pillowed on his paws to contemplate the matter. The room darkened as the sun went under a cloud, and the young golden, dark-barred cat looked like a pool of sunlight left behind. Kitty Come Here had watched the whole performance from the door to the dining room, and that evening she commented on it to old Horsemeat. "He backed away from the water as if it were poison," she said. "They must have been putting more chlorine in it lately, you know, and maybe he can taste the fluorides they put in for dental decay." Old Horsemeat doubted that, but his wife went on. "I can't figure out where Gummidge does his drinking these days. There never seems to be any water gone from his bowl, and we haven't had any cut flowers, and none of the faucets drip." "He probably does his drinking somewhere outside," old Horsemeat guessed. "But he doesn't go outside very often these days," Kitty Come Here countered. "Scarface and the Mad Eunuch, you know. Besides, it hasn't rained for weeks. It's certainly a mystery to me where he gets his liquids. Boiling gets the chlorine out of water, doesn't it? I think I'll try him on some tomorrow." "Maybe he's depressed," old Horsemeat suggested. "That often leads to secret drinking." This Baroque witticism hit fairly close to the truth. Gummidge was depressed, had been depressed ever since he had lost his kittenish dreams of turning into a man, achieving spaceflight, learning and publishing all the secrets of the fourth dimension, and similar marvels. The black cloud of disillusionment at realizing he could only be a cat had lightened somewhat, but he was still feeling dull and unfulfilled. Gummidge was at that difficult age for he-cats, between first puberty, when the cat achieves essential maleness, and second puberty, when he gets broad-chested, jowly, and thick-ruffed, becoming a fully armed sexual competitor. In the ordinary course of things, he would have been spending much of his time exploring the outer world, detail mapping the immediate vicinity, spying on other cats, making cautious approaches to unescorted females, and in all ways comporting himself like a fledgling male. But this was prevented by the two burly Toms who lived in the houses next door, and who, far more interested in murder than the pursuit of mates, had entered into partnership with the sole object of bushwhacking Gummidge. Gummidge's household had nicknamed them Scarface and the Mad Eunuch, the latter one being one of those males whom fixing turns not placid, but homicidally maniacal. Compared to these seasoned heavyweights, Gummidge was a welterweight at most. Scarface and the Mad Eunuch lay in wait for him by turns just beyond the kitchen door, so that his forays into the outside world were largely reduced to dashes for some hiding hole, followed by long, boring, but perilous sieges. He often wished that old Horsemeat's two older cats, Ashurbanipal and Cleopatra, had not gone to the country to live with old Horsemeat's mother. They would have shown the evil bushwhackers a thing or two. Because of Scarface and the Mad Eunuch, Gummidge spent most of his time indoors. Since a cat is made for a half and half existence, half in the wild forest, half in the secure cave, he took to brooding quite morbidly. He thought over much of ghost cats in the mirror world, and of the skeleton cat who starved to death in a locked closet, and similar grisly legends. He immersed himself in racial memories, not so much of ancient Egypt, where cats were prized as minions of the lovely cat goddess Bast, and ceremoniously mummified at the end of tranquil lives, as of the Middle Ages, when European mankind waged a genocidal war against felines as being the familiars of witches. He thought briefly of turning Kitty Come Here into a witch, but his hypnotic staring and tentative ritualistic mewing only made her fidgety. Then he devoted more and more time to devising dark versions of the theory of transmigration, picturing cats as silent souls, gagged people of great talent, and the like. He had become too self-conscious to re-enter often the make-believe world of the kitten, yet his imagination remained as active as ever. It was a truly frustrating predicament. More and more often, and for longer periods, he retired to meditate in a corrugated cardboard shoebox, open only at one end. The cramped quarters made it easier for him to think. Old Horsemeat called it a cat orgone box, after the famed orgone energy accumulators of the late wildcat psychoanalyst Dr. Wilhelm Reich. If only, Gummidge thought, he could devise some way of objectifying the intimations of beauty that flitted through his darkly clouded mind. Now, on the evening of the sunny day when he had backed away from his water bowl, he attacked the problem anew. He knew that he had been fleetingly on the verge of a great idea, an idea involving water, light, and movement, an idea he had unfortunately forgotten. He closed his eyes and twitched his nose. I must concentrate, he thought to himself. Concentrate. Next day, Kitty Come Here remembered her idea about Gummidge's water. She boiled 2 cupfuls in a spotless enamelware saucepan, letting it cool for half an hour before using it to replace the seemingly offensive water in the young cat's bowl. It was only then she noticed that the bowl had been upset. She casually assumed that big-footed old Horsemeat must have been responsible for the accident, or possibly one of the 2 children, darting Sissy or blundering Baby. She wiped the bowl and filled it with the water she had dechlorinated. "Come here, Kitty, come here," she called to Gummidge, who had been watching her actions attentively from the dining-room door. The young cat stayed where he was. "Oh, well, if you want to be coy," she said, shrugging her shoulders. There was a mystery about the spilled water. It had apparently disappeared entirely, though the day seemed hardly dry enough for total evaporation. Then she saw it standing in a puddle by the wall, fully 10 feet away from the bowl. She made a quick deduction and frowned a bit worriedly. "I never realized the kitchen floor sloped that much," she told old Horsemeat after dinner. "Maybe some beams need to be jacked up in the basement. I'd hate to think of it collapsing. I'd hate to think of collapsing into it while I'm cooking dinner."
"I'm sure this house finished all its settling 30 years ago," her husband assured her hurriedly. "That slope's always been there."
"Well, if you say so," Kitty Come Here allowed doubtfully. Next day she found Gummitch's bowl upset again, and the remains of the boiled water in a puddle across the room. As she mopped it up, she began to do some thinking without benefit of concentration box. That evening, after old Horsemeat and Sissy had vehemently denied kicking into the water bowl or stepping on its edge, she voiced her conclusions. "I think Gummitch upsets it," she said. "He's rejecting it. It still doesn't taste right to him, and he wants to show us."
"Maybe he only likes it after it's run across the floor and got seasoned with the household dust and the corpses of germs," suggested old Horsemeat, who believed most cats were bohemian types.
"I'll have you know I scrub that linoleum," Kitty Come Here asserted.
"Well, with detergent and scouring powder, then,"
Old Horsemeat amended resourcefully. Kitty Come Here made a scornful noise. "I still want to know where he gets his liquids," she said. "He's been off milk for weeks, you know, and he only drinks a little broth when I give him that. Yet he doesn't seem dehydrated. It's a real mystery, and
"Maybe he's built a still in the attic," old Horsemeat interjected.
and I'm going to find the answers," Kitty Come Here concluded, ignoring the facetious interruption. "I'm going to find out where he gets the water he does drink and why he rejects the water I give him. This time I'm going to boil it and put in a pinch of salt. Just a pinch."
"You make animals sound more delicate about food and drink than humans," old Horsemeat observed.
"They probably are," his wife countered. "For one thing, they don't smoke or drink martinis. It's my firm belief that animals, cats anyway, like good food just as much as we do. And the same sort of good food. They don't enjoy canned cat food any more than we would, though they can eat it, just as we could if we had to. I really don't think Gummitch would have such a passion for raw horse meat, except you started him on it so early."
"He probably thinks of it as steak tartare."
Steak tartare. Blech, my brain. Old Horsemeat said. Next day, Kitty Come Here found her salted offering upset just as the two previous bowls had been. Such were the beginnings of the great spilled water mystery that preoccupied the human members of the Gummitch household for weeks. Not every day, but frequently, and sometimes 2 and 3 times a day, Gummitch's little bowl was upset. No one ever saw the young cat do it, but it was generally accepted that he was responsible, though for a time old Horsemeat had theories that he did not voice involving Sissy and Baby. Kitty Come Here bought Gummitch a firm-footed rubber bowl for his water, though she hesitated over the purchase for some time, certain he would be able to taste the rubber. This bowl was found upset just like his regular china one, and like the tin one she briefly revived from his kitten days. All sorts of clues and possibly related circumstances were seized upon and dissected. For instance, after about a month of the mysterious spillings, Kitty Come Here announced, "I've been thinking back, and as far as I can remember, it never happens except on sunny days." "Oh, good Lord!" old Horsemeat reacted. Meanwhile, Kitty Come Here continued to try to concoct a kind of water that would be palatable to Gummitch. As she continued, without success, her formulas became more fantastic. She quit boiling it for the most part, but added a pinch of sugar, a spoonful of beer, a few flakes of oregano, a green leaf, a violet, a drop of a vanilla extract, a drop of iodine. "No wonder he rejects the stuff," old Horsemeat was tempted to say, but didn't. Finally, Kitty Come Here, inspired by the sight of a greenly glittering rack of it at the supermarket, purchased a half-gallon of bottled water from a famous spring. She wondered why she hadn't thought of this step earlier. It certainly ought to take care of her haunting convictions about the unpalatableness of chlorine or fluorides. She herself could distinctly taste the fluorides in the tap water, though she never mentioned this to old Horsemeat. One other development during the great spilled water mystery was that Gummidge gradually emerged from depression and became quite gay. He took to dancing cat schottishes and gigs impromptu in the living room of an evening, and so forgot his dignity as to battle joyously with the vacuum cleaner dragon when old Horsemeat used one of the smaller attachments to curry him. The young cat clutched the hairy round brush to his stomach and madly clawed it as it wuffled menacingly. Even the afternoon he came home with a shoulder gashed by the mad eunuch, he seemed strangely light-hearted and debonair. The mystery was abruptly solved one Sunday afternoon. Going into the bathroom in her stocking feet, Kitty Come Here saw Gummidge apparently trying to drown himself in the toilet. His hindquarters were on the seat, but the rest of his body went down into the bowl. Coming closer, she saw that his forelegs were braced against the opposite side of the bowl, just above the water's surface, while his head thrust down sharply between his shoulders. She could distinctly hear rhythmic lapping. To tell the truth, Kitty Come Here was rather shocked. She had certain rather fixed ideas about the delicacy of cats. It speaks well for her progressive grounding that she did not shout at Gummidge, but softly summoned her husband. By the time old Horsemeat arrived, the young cat had refreshed himself, and was coming out of his well with a sudden backward undulation. He passed them in the doorway with a single mew and upward look, and then made off for the kitchen. The blue and white room was bright with sunlight. Outside the sky was blue, and the leaves were rustling in a stiff breeze. Gummidge looked back once, as if to make sure his human congeners had followed, mewed again, and then advanced briskly towards his little bowl with an air of one who proposes to reveal all mysteries at once. Kitty Come Here had almost outdone herself. She had, for the first time, poured him the bottled water, and she had floated a few rose petals on the surface. Gummidge regarded them carefully, sniffed at them, and then proceeded to fish them out one by one and shake them off his paw. Old Horsemeat repressed the urge to say, "I told you so." When the water's surface was completely free and winking in the sunlight, Gummidge curved one paw under the side of the bowl and jerked. Half the water spilled out, gathered itself, and then began to flow across the floor in little rushes, a silver ribbon sparkling with sunlight, that divided and subdivided and reunited as it followed the slope. Gummidge crouched to one side, watching it intensely, following its progress inch by inch and foot by foot, almost pouncing on the little temporary pools that formed, but not quite touching them. Twice he mewed faintly in excitement. "He's playing with it," old Horsemeat said incredulously. "No," Kitty Come Here countered wide-eyed. "He's creating something. Silver mice, water snakes, twinkling vines." "Good Lord, you're right," old Horsemeat agreed. "It's a new art form. Would you call it a water painting or a water sculpture? Somehow I think that's best. As if a sculptor made mobiles out of molten tin." "It's gone so quickly, though," Kitty Come Here objected, a little sadly. "Art ought to last. Look, it's almost flowed over to the wall now." "Some of the best art forms are completely fugitive," old Horsemeat argued. "What about improvisation in music and dancing? What about jam sessions and shadow figures on the wall? Gummidge can always do it again. In fact, he must have been doing it again and again this last month. It's never exactly the same, like waves or fires, but it's beautiful." "I suppose so," Kitty Come Here said. Then, coming to herself, she continued, "But I don't think it can be healthy for him to go on drinking water out of the toilet. Really." Old Horsemeat shrugged. He had an insight about the artistic temperament and the need to dig for inspiration into the smelly fundamentals of life, but it was difficult to express delicately. Kitty Come Here sighed, as if bidding farewell to all her efforts with rose petals and crystalline bottled purity and vanilla extract and the soda water which had amazed Gummidge by faintly spitting and purring at him. Oh, well, she said, I can scrub it out more often, I suppose. Meanwhile, Gummidge had gone back to his bowl and, using both paws, overset it completely. Now, nose a twitch, he once more pursued the silver streams alive with suns, refreshing his spirit with the sight of them. He was fretted by no problems about what he was doing. He had solved them all with one of his characteristically sharp distinctions. There was the sacred water, the sparkling clear water to drink with, and there was the water with character, the water to drink. And that was Creativity for Cats by Fritz Lieber. Aw. Um, that would qualify as a science fiction story in the loosest possible sense. In this case, the loose sense of kind of the way it is told. It's told in a very science fiction-y, over-detailed, over-descriptive way. Let's see. What do I got here? I got another one here. Where'd it go? Wah! Oh my goodness, what is this thing doing? There we go. Arg! And here is... Oh, this one is also by Fritz Lieber. Come on. And where's the date? There it is. Galaxy Science Fiction from April 1952. Uh, okay, so this one is called The Moon is Green. And once this thing catches up with what I've told it to do. Oh my goodness, what is it doing? It just reordered. It just reordered pages, so I've got to adjust it. This program I've been using for these texts has been finicky lately. I think it's because of the last update I got for it, and I've got to re-roll backwards, roll back to a earlier patch. Because when I'm trying to adjust the size of the window, it changes like paragraph structure. It acts really weird. Okay, this will do for now, I guess. I guess. Ach, der Teufel. This will do. Fine. Okay, so The Moon is Green from 1952? 1952 by Fritz Lieber. And I just cannot size this thing properly. Okay, fine. We're calling it. Calling it. The Moon is Green by Fritz Lieber.
Effie, what the devil are you up to?
Her husband's voice, chopping through her mood of terrified rapture, made her heart jump like a startled cat. Yet by some miracle of feminine self-control, her body did not show a tremor. Dear God, she thought, he mustn't see it. It's so beautiful, and he always kills beauty. I'm just looking at the moon, she said listlessly. It's green. Mustn't see it. And now, with luck, he wouldn't. For the face, as if it also heard and sensed the menace in the voice, was moving back from the window's glow into the outside dark, but slowly, reluctantly, and still fawn-like, pleading, cajoling, tempting, and incredibly beautiful.
Close the shutters at once, you little fool, and come away from the window.
Green as a beer bottle, she went on dreamily. Green as emeralds, green as leaves with sunshine striking through them, and green grass to lie on. She couldn't help saying those last words. They were her token to the face, even though it couldn't hear.
Effie!
She knew what that last tone meant. Wearily she swung shut the ponderous lead inner shutters and drove home the heavy bolts. That hurt her fingers. It always did, but he mustn't know that.
You know the shutters are not to be touched, not for 5 more years at least.
I only wanted to look at the moon, she said, turning around. And then it was all gone. The face, the night, the moon, the magic. And she was back in the grubby, stale little hole, facing an angry, stale little man. It was then that the eternal thud of the air-conditioning fans and the crackle of the electrostatic precipitators that sieved out the dust reached her consciousness again, like the bite of a dentist's drill.
Only wanted to look at the moon, he mimicked her in falsetto. Only wanted to die like a little fool and make me that much more ashamed of you.
Then his voice went gruff and professional.
Here, count yourself.
She silently took the Geiger counter he held at arm's length, waited until it settled down to a steady ticking slower than a clock, due only to cosmic rays and indicating nothing dangerous, then began to comb her body with the instrument. First her head and shoulders, then out along her arms and back along their underside. There was something oddly voluptuous about her movements, although her features were gray and sagging. The ticking did not change its tempo until he came to her waist. Then it suddenly spurted, clicking faster and faster. Her husband gave an excited grunt, took a quick step forward, froze. She goggled for a moment in fear, then grinned foolishly, dug in the pocket of her grimy apron, and guiltily pulled out a wristwatch. He grabbed it as it dangled from her fingers, saw that it had a radium dial, cursed, heaved it up as if to smash it on the floor, but instead put it carefully on the table.
You imbecile, you incredible imbecile,
he softly chanted to himself through clenched teeth, with eyes half closed. She shrugged faintly, put the Geiger counter on the table, and stood there, slumped. He waited until the chanting had soothed his anger, before speaking again. He said, quietly,
I do suppose you still realize the sort of world you're living in?
She nodded, slowly, staring at nothingness. Oh, she realized, all right, realized only too well. It was the world that hadn't realized. The world that had gone on stockpiling hydrogen bombs. The world that had put those bombs in cobalt shells, although it had promised it wouldn't, because the cobalt made them much more terrible and cost no more. The world that had started throwing those bombs, always telling itself that it hadn't thrown enough of them yet to make the air really dangerous with the deadly radioactive dust that came from the cobalt. Thrown them and kept on throwing until the danger point, where air and ground would become fatal to all human life, was approached. Then, for about a month, the two great enemy groups had hesitated, and then each, unknown to the other, had decided it could risk one last gigantic and decisive attack without exceeding the danger point. It had been planned to strip off the cobalt cases, but someone forgot, and then there wasn't time. Besides, the military scientists of each group were confident that the lands of the other had got the most dust. The two attacks came within an hour of each other. After that, the fury. The fury of doomed men who think only of taking with them as many as possible of the enemy, and in this case, they hoped, all. The fury of suicides who know they have botched up life for good. The fury of cocksure men who realize they have been outsmarted by fate, the enemy, and themselves, and know that they will never be able to improvise a defense when arraigned before the high court of history, and whose unadmitted hope is that there will be no high court of history left to arraign them. More cobalt bombs were dropped during the fury than in all the preceding years of the war. After the fury, the terror. Men and women with death sifting into their bones through their nostrils and skin, fighting for bare survival under a dust-hazed sky that played fantastic tricks with the light of sun and moon, like the dust from Krakatoa that had drifted around the world for years. Cities, countryside, and air were alike poisoned, alive with deadly radiation. The only realistic chance for continued existence was to retire, for the 5 or 10 years the radiation would remain deadly, to some well-sealed and radiation-shielded place that must also be copiously supplied with food, water, power, and a means of air conditioning. Such places were prepared by the far-seeing, seized by the stronger, defended by them in turn against the desperate hordes of the dying, until there were no more of those. After that, only the waiting, the enduring. A mole's existence, without beauty or tenderness, but with fear and guilt as the constant companions. Never to see the sun, to walk among the trees, or even know if there were still trees. Oh yes, she realized what the world was like. You understand, too, I suppose, that we were allowed to reclaim this ground level apartment only because the committee believed us to be responsible people, and because I've been making a damn good showing lately? Yes, Hank. I thought you were eager for privacy. You want to go back to the basement tenements? God, no. Anything rather than that fetid huddling, that shameless communal sprawl. And yet, was this so much better? The nearness to the surface was meaningless. It only tantalized. And the privacy magnified Hank. She shook her head dutifully and said, "No, Hank." "Then why aren't you careful? I've told you a million times, Effie, that glass is no protection against the dust that's outside that window. The lead shutter must never be touched. If you make one single slip like that and it gets around, the committee will send us back to the lower levels without blinking an eye, and they'll think twice before trusting me with any important jobs." "I'm sorry, Hank." "Sorry? What's the good of being sorry? The only thing that counts is to never make a slip. Why the devil do you do such things, Effie? What drives you to it?" She swallowed. "It's just that it's so dreadful being cooped up like this," she said hesitatingly, "shut away from the sky and the sun. I'm just hungry for a little beauty." "And do you suppose I'm not?" he demanded. "Don't you suppose I want to get outside, too, and be carefree and have a good time? But I'm not so damn selfish about it. I want my children to enjoy the sun, and my children's children. Don't you see that that's the all-important thing, and that we have to behave like mature adults and make sacrifices for it?" "Yes, Hank." He surveyed her slumped figure, her lined and listless face. "You're a fine one to talk about hunger for beauty," he told her. Then his voice grew softer, more deliberate. "You haven't forgotten, have you, Effie, that until last month the committee was so concerned about your sterility? That they were about to enter my name on the list of those waiting to be allotted a free woman? Very high on the list, too." She could nod even at that one, but not while looking at him. She turned away. She knew very well that the committee was justified in worrying about the birth rate. When the community finally moved back to the surface again, each additional healthy young person would be an asset, not only in the struggle for bare survival, but in the resumed war against communism, which some of the committee members still counted on. It was natural that they should view a sterile woman with disfavor, and not only because of the waste of her husband's germ plasm, but because sterility might indicate that she had suffered more than the average from radiation. In that case, if she did bear children later on, they would be more apt to carry a defective heredity, producing an undue number of monsters and freaks in future generations, and so contaminating the race. Of course she understood it. She could hardly remember the time when she didn't. Years ago? Centuries? There wasn't much difference in a place where time was endless. His lecture finished, her husband smiled and grew almost cheerful. Now that you're going to have a child, that's all in the background again. Do you know, Effie, that when I first came in, I had some very good news for you? I'm to become a member of the junior committee, and the announcement will be made at the banquet tonight. He cut short her mumbled congratulations. So brighten yourself up and put on your best dress. I want the other juniors to see what a handsome wife the new member has got. He paused. Well, get a move on. She spoke with difficulty, still not looking at him. I'm terribly sorry, Hank, but you'll have to go alone. I'm not well. He straightened up with an indignant jerk. There you go again. First that infantile, inexcusable business of the shutters, and now this. No feeling for my reputation at all. Don't be ridiculous, Effie. You're coming. Terribly sorry, she repeated blindly, but I really can't. I'd just be sick. I wouldn't make you proud of me at all.
Of course you won't, he retorted sharply. As it is, I have to spend half my energy running around making excuses for you. Why you're so odd, why you always seem to be ailing, why you're always stupid and snobbish and say the wrong thing. But tonight's really important, Effie. It will cause a lot of bad comment if the new member's wife isn't present. You know how just a hint of sickness starts the old radiation disease rumor going. You've got to come, Effie.
She shook her head helplessly.
Oh, for heaven's sake, come on, he shouted, advancing on her. This is just a silly mood. As soon as you get going, you'll snap out of it. There's nothing really wrong with you at all.
He put his hand on her shoulder to turn her around, and at his touch her face suddenly grew so desperate and gray that for a moment he was alarmed in spite of himself.
Really?
He asked, almost with a note of concern. She nodded miserably.
Hmm.
He stepped back and strode about irresolutely.
Well, of course, if that's the way it is.
He checked himself, and a sad smile crossed his face.
So you don't care enough about your old husband's success to make one supreme effort in spite of feeling bad?
Again, the helpless headshake. I just can't go out tonight under any circumstances. And her gaze stole toward the lead shutters. He was about to say something when he caught the direction of her gaze. His eyebrows jumped. For seconds he stared at her incredulously, as if some completely new and almost unbelievable possibility had popped into his mind. The look of incredulity slowly faded, to be replaced by a harder, more calculating expression. But when he spoke again, his voice was shockingly bright and kind.
Well, it can't be helped, naturally, and I certainly wouldn't want you to go if you weren't able to enjoy it. So you hop right into bed and get a good rest. I'll run over to the men's dorm to freshen up. No, really, I don't want you to have to make any effort at all. Incidentally, Jim Barnes isn't going to be able to come to the banquet either. Touch of the old flu, he tells me, of all things.
He watched her closely as he mentioned the other man's name, but she didn't react noticeably. In fact, she hardly seemed to be hearing his chatter.
I got a bit sharp with you, I'm afraid, Effie, he continued contritely. I'm sorry about that. I was excited about my new job, and I guess that was why things upset me. Made me feel let down when I found you weren't feeling as good as I was. Selfish of me. Now you get into bed right away and get well. Don't worry about me a bit. I know you'd come if you possibly could, and I know you'll be thinking about me. Well, I must be off now.
He started toward her as if to embrace her, then seemed to think better of it. He turned back at the doorway and said, emphasizing the words, "You'll be completely alone for the next 4 hours." He waited for her to nod, then bounced out. She stood still until his footsteps died away. Then she straightened up, walked over to where he'd put down the wristwatch, picked it up, and smashed it hard on the floor. The crystal shattered, the case flew apart, and something went zing. She stood there, breathing heavily. Slowly her sagged features lifted, formed themselves into the beginning of a smile. She stole another look at the shutters. The smile became more definite. She felt her hair, wet her fingers, and ran them along her hairline and back over her ears. After wiping her hands down on her apron, she took it off. She straightened her dress, lifted her head with a little flourish, and stepped smartly toward the window. Her face went miserable again, and her steps slowed. No, it couldn't be, and it won't be, she told herself. It had been just an illusion, a silly, romantic dream that she had somehow projected out of her beauty-starved mind and given a moment's false reality. There couldn't be anything alive outside. There hadn't been for 2 whole years. And if there conceivably were, it would be something altogether horrible. She remembered some of the pariahs. Hairless, witless creatures with radiation welts crawling over their bodies like worms, who had come begging for succor during the last months of the Terror, and been shot down. How they must have hated the people in refuges. But even as she was thinking these things, her fingers were caressing the bolts, gingerly drawing them, as if she was opening the shutters gently, apprehensively. No, there couldn't be anything outside, she assured herself. I cannot talk today. She assured herself wryly, peering out into the green night. Even her fears had been groundless. But the face came floating up toward the window. She started back in terror, then checked herself. For the face wasn't horrible at all, only very thin, with large, full lips, and large eyes, and a thin, proud nose like the jutting beak of a bird. And no radiation welts or scars marred the skin, olive in the tempered moonlight. It looked, in fact, just as it had when she had seen it the first time. For a long moment the face stared deep, deep into her brain. Then the full lips smiled, and a half-clenched, thin-fingered hand materialized itself from the green darkness and rapped twice on the grimy pane. Her heart pounding, she furiously worked the little crank that opened the window. It came unstuck from the frame with a tiny explosion of dust and a zing like that of the watch, only louder. A moment later it swung open wide, and a puff of incredibly fresh air caressed her face and the inside of her nostrils, stinging her eyes with unanticipated tears. The man outside balanced on the sill, crouched like a fawn, head high, one elbow on knee. He was dressed in scarred, snug trousers and an old sweater. "Is it tears I get for a welcome?" he mocked her gently in a musical voice. "Or are those only to greet God's own breath, the air?" He swung down inside, and now she could see he was tall. Turning, he snapped his fingers and called, "Come, puss." A black cat with a twisted stump of a tail and feet like small boxing gloves and ears almost as big as a rabbit's hopped clumsily in view. He lifted it down, gave it a pat. Then, nodding familiarly to Effie, he unstrapped a little pack from his back and laid it on the table. She couldn't move. She even found it hard to breathe. "The window," she finally managed to get out. He looked at her inquiringly, caught the direction of her stabbing finger. Moving without haste, he went over and closed it carelessly. "The shutters, too," she told him, but he ignored that, looking around. "It's a snug enough place you and your man have," he commented. "Or is that this or is it that this is a free love town, or a harem spot, or just a military post?" He checked her before she could answer. "But let's not be talking about such things now. Soon enough I'll be scared to death for both of us. Best enjoy the kick of meeting, which is always good for 20 minutes at the least." He smiled at her rather shyly. "Have you food? Good, then bring it." She set cold meat and some precious canned bread before him, and had water heating for coffee. Before he fell to, she shredded a chunk of meat and put it on the floor for the cat, which left off its sniffing inspection of the walls and ran up eagerly mewing. Then the man began to eat, chewing each mouthful slowly and appreciatively. From across the table Effie watched him, drinking in his every deft movement, his every cryptic quirk of expression. She attended to making the coffee, but that took only a moment. Finally she could contain herself no longer. "What's it like up there?" she asked breathlessly. "Outside, I mean." He looked at her oddly for quite a space. Finally he said flatly, "Oh, it's a wonderland for sure. More amazing than you tombed folk could ever imagine. A veritable fairyland." And he quickly went on eating. "No, but really," she pressed. Noting her eagerness, he smiled and his eyes filled with playful tenderness. "I mean it, on my oath," he assured her. "You think the bombs and the dust made only death and ugliness. That was true at first. But then, just as the doctors foretold, they changed the life in the seeds and the loins that were brave enough to stay. Wonders bloomed and walked." He broke off suddenly and asked, "Do any of you ever venture outside?" "A few of the men are allowed to," she told him, "for short trips in special protective suits to hunt for canned food and fuels and batteries and things like that." "Aye, and those blind-souled slugs would never see anything but what they're looking for," he said, nodding bitterly. "They'd never see the garden where a dozen buds blossom where one did before, and the flowers have petals a yard across, with stingless bees big as sparrows gently supping their nectar. House cats grown spotted and huge as leopards, not little runts like Joe Louis here, stalk through those gardens. But they're gentle beasts, no more harmful than the rainbow-scaled snakes that glide around their paws, for the dust burned all the murder out of them, as it burned itself out. I've even made up a little poem about that. It starts, 'Fire can hurt me, or water, or the weight of earth, but the dust is my friend.' Oh yes, and then the robins like cockatoos and squirrels like a princess's ermine, all under a treasure chest of sun and moon and stars that the dust's magic powder changes from ruby to emerald and sapphire and amethyst and back again. Oh, and then the new children." "You're telling the truth?" she interrupted him, her eyes brimming with tears. "You're not making it up?" "I am not," he assured her solemnly. "And if you could catch a glimpse of one of the new children, you'd never doubt me again. They have long limbs as brown as this coffee would be if it had lots of fresh cream in it, and smiling, delicate faces, and the whitish teeth and the finest hair. They're so nimble that I, a sprightly man and somewhat enlivened by the dust, feel like a cripple beside them, and their thoughts dance like flames and make me feel a very imbecile. Of course, they have 7 fingers on each hand and 8 toes on each foot, but they're the more beautiful for that. They have large pointed ears that the sun shines through. They play in the garden all day long, slipping among the great leaves and blooms, but they're so swift that you can hardly see them until one chooses to stand still and look at you. For that matter, you have to look a bit hard for all these things I'm telling you." "But is it true?" she pleaded. "Every word of it," he said, looking straight into her eyes. He put down his knife and fork. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Mine's Patrick." Effie, she told him. He shook his head. That can't be, he said. Then his face brightened. Euphemia, he exclaimed. That's what Effie is short for. Your name is Euphemia. As he said that, looking at her, she suddenly felt beautiful. He got up and came around the table and stretched out his hand toward her. Euphemia, he began. Yes, she answered huskily, shrinking from him a little, but looking up sideways and very flushed. Don't either of you two move, Hank said. The voice was flat and nasal because Hank was wearing a nose respirator that was just long enough to suggest an elephant's trunk. In his right hand was a large blue-black automatic pistol. They turned their faces to him. Patrick's was abruptly alert, shifty. But Effie's was still smiling tenderly, as if Hank could not break the spell of the magic garden and should be pitied for not knowing about it.
You little...
Hank began with an almost gleeful fury, calling her several shameful names. He spoke in short phrases, closing tight his unmasked mouth between them while he sucked in breath through the respirator. His voice rose in a crescendo.
And not with a man of the community, but a pariah! A pariah!
I hardly know what you're thinking, man, but you're quite wrong. Patrick took the opportunity to put in hurriedly, conciliatingly. I just happened to be coming by hungry tonight, a lonely tramp, and knocked at the window. Your wife was a bit foolish and let her kind-heartedness get the better of prudence.
Don't think you've pulled the wool over my eyes, Effie,
Hank went on with a screechy laugh, disregarding the other man completely.
Don't think that don't know why you're suddenly going to have a child after 4 long years.
At that moment the cat came nosing up to his feet. Patrick watched him narrowly, shifting his weight forward a little, but Hank only kicked the animal aside without taking his eyes off them.
Even that business of carrying the wristwatch in your pocket instead of on your arm,
He went on with channeled hysteria.
A neat bit of camouflage, Effie. Very neat. And telling me it was my child when all the while you've been seeing him for months.
Man, you're mad. I've not touched her, Patrick denied hotly, though still calculatingly, and risked a step forward, stopping when the gun instantly swung his way.
Pretending you were going to give me a healthy child,
Hank raved on,
when all the while you knew it would be, either in body or germplasm, a thing like that.
He waved his gun at the malformed cat, which had leaped to the top of the table and was eating the remains of Patrick's food, though its watchful green eyes were fixed on Hank.
I should shoot him down,
Hank yelled between sobbing, chest-racking inhalations through the mask.
I should kill him this instant for the contaminated pariah he is.
All this while Effie had not ceased to smile compassionately. Now she stood up without haste and went to Patrick's side. Disregarding his warning, apprehensive glance, she put her arm lightly around him and faced her husband. Then you'd be killing the bringer of the best news we've ever had, she said, and her voice was like a flood of some warm, sweet liquor in that musty, hate-charged room. Oh, Hank, forget your silly, wrong jealousy and listen to me. Patrick here has something wonderful to tell us. Hank stared at her. For once he screamed no reply. It was obvious that he was seeing for the first time how beautiful she had become, and the realization jolted him terribly.
What do you mean?
He finally asked unevenly, almost fearfully. I mean that we no longer need to fear the dust, she said, and now her smile was radiant. It never really did hurt people the way the doctor said it would. Remember how it was with me, Hank, the exposure I had and recovered from, although the doctor said I wouldn't at first, and without even losing my hair? Hank, those who were brave enough to stay outside and who weren't killed by terror and suggestion and panic, they adapted to the dust. They changed, but they changed for the better. Everything...
Effie, he told you lies,
Hank interrupted, but still in that same agitated, broken voice, cowed by her beauty. Everything that grew or moved was purified, she went on ringingly. You men going outside have never seen it because you've never had eyes for it. You've been blinded to beauty, to life itself. And now all the power in the dust has gone and faded anyway, burned itself out. That's true, isn't it? She smiled at Patrick for confirmation. His face was strangely veiled, as if he were calculating obscure changes. He might have given a little nod. At any rate, Effie assumed that he did, for she turned back to her husband. You see, Hank, we can all go out now. We need never fear the dust again. Patrick is a living proof of that, she continued triumphantly, standing straighter, holding him a little tighter. Look at him. Not a scar or a sign, and he's been out in the dust for years. How could he be this way if the dust hurt the brave? Oh, believe me, Hank. Believe what you see. Test it if you want. Test Patrick here.
Effie, you're all mixed up. You don't know.
Hank faltered, but without any conviction of any sort. Just test him, Effie repeated with utter confidence, ignoring, and not even noticing, Patrick's warning nudge.
All right.
Hank mumbled. He looked at the stranger dully.
Can you count?
He asked. Patrick's face was a complete enigma. Then he suddenly spoke, and his voice was like a fencer's foil, light, bright, alert, constantly playing, yet utterly on guard. Can I count? Do you take me for a complete simpleton, man? Of course I can count.
Then count yourself.
Hank said, barely indicating the table. Count myself, should I? The other retorted with a quick, facetious laugh. Is this a kindergarten? But if you want me to, I'm willing. His voice was rapid. I've 2 arms and 2 legs, that's 4, and 10 fingers and 10 toes. You'll take my word for them? That's 24. A head, 25, and 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth.
With this, I mean.
Hank said heavily, advanced to the table, picked up the Geiger counter, switched it on, and handed it across the table to the other man. But while it was still an arm's length from Patrick, the clicks began to mount furiously, until they were like the chatter of a pygmy machine gun. Abruptly, the clicks slowed, but that was only the counter shifting to a new scaling circuit, in which each click stood for 512 of the old ones. With those horrid, rattling little volleys, fear cascaded into the room and filled it, smashing like so much colored glass all the bright barriers of words Effie had raised against it. For no dreams can stand against the Geiger counter, the 20th century's mouthpiece of ultimate truth. It was as if the dust and all the terrors of the dust had incarnated themselves in one dread invading shape that said in words stronger than audible speech, those were illusions, whistles in the dark. This is reality, the dreary, pitiless reality of the burrowing years. Hank scuttled back to the wall. Through chattering teeth he babbled.
Enough radioactives. Kill 1,000 men. Freak. A freak.
In his agitation, he forgot for a moment to inhale through the respirator. Even Effie, taken off guard, all the fears that had been drilled into her twanging like piano wires, shrank from the skeletal-seeming shape beside her, held herself to it only by desperation. Patrick did it for her. He disengaged her arm and stepped briskly away. Then he whirled on them, smiling sardonically, and started to speak, but instead looked with distaste at the chattering Geiger counter he held between fingers and thumb. Have we listened to this racket long enough? He asked. Without waiting for an answer, he put down the instrument on the table. The cat hurried over to it curiously, and the clicks began again to mount in a minor crescendo. Effie lunged for it frantically, switched it off, darted back. That's right, Patrick said with another chilling smile. You do well to cringe, for I'm death itself. Even in death I could kill you, like a snake. and with that his voice took on the tones of a circus barker. "Yes, I'm a freak, as the gentleman so wisely said. That's what one doctor who dared talk with me for a minute told me before he kicked me out. He couldn't tell me why, but somehow the dust doesn't kill me. Because I'm a freak, you see. Just like the men who ate nails and walked on fire and ate arsenic and stuck themselves through with pins. Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, only not too close, and examine the man the dust can't harm. Rappaccini's child, brought up to date, his embrace, death." "And now," he said, breathing heavily, "I'll get out and leave you in your damned lead cave." He started toward the window. Hank's gun followed him shakingly. "Wait!" Effie called in an agonized voice. He obeyed. She continued falteringly. "When we were together earlier, you didn't act as if—" "When we were together earlier, I wanted what I wanted," he snarled at her. "You don't suppose I'm a bloody saint, do you?" "And all the beautiful things you told me?" "That," he said cruelly, "is just a line I've found that women fall for. They're all so bored and so starved for beauty, as they generally put it." "Even the garden?" Her question was barely audible through sobs that threatened to suffocate her. He looked at her, and perhaps his expression softened just a trifle. "What's outside," he said flatly, "is just a little worse than either of you can imagine." He tapped his temple. "The garden's all here." "You've killed it," she wept. "You've killed it in me. You've both killed everything that's beautiful. But you're worse," she screamed at Patrick, "because he only killed beauty once, but you brought it to life just so you could kill it again. Oh, I can't stand it. I won't stand it." And she began to scream. Patrick started toward her, but she broke off and whirled away from him to the window, her eyes crazy. "You've been lying to us," she cried. "The garden's there. I know it is. But you don't want to share it with anyone." "No, no, Euphemia," Patrick protested anxiously. "It's hell out there, believe me. I wouldn't lie to you about it." "Wouldn't lie to me!" she mocked. "Are you afraid, too?" With a sudden pull, she jerked open the window and stood before the blank, green-tinged oblong of darkness that seemed to press into the room like a menacing, heavy, wind-urged curtain. At that, Hank cried out a shocking, pleading, "Effie!" She ignored him. "I can't be cooped up here any longer," she said. "And I won't, now that I know. I'm going to the garden." Both men sprang at her, but they were too late. She leaped lightly to the sill, and by the time they had flung themselves against it, her footsteps were already hurrying off into the darkness. "Effie, come back! Come back!" Hank shouted after her desperately, no longer thinking to cringe from the man beside him, or how the gun was pointed. "I love you, Effie! Come back!" Patrick added his voice. "Come back, Euphemia! You'll be safe if you come back right away. Come back to your home." No answer to that at all. They both strained their eyes through the greenish murk. They could barely make out a shadowy figure about half a block down the near black canyon of the dismal, dust-blown street, into which the greenish moonlight hardly reached. It seemed to them that the figure was scooping something up from the pavement and letting it sift down along its arms and over its bosom. "Go out and get her, man," Patrick urged the other, "for if I go out for her, I warn you I won't bring her back. She said something about having stood the dust better than most, and that's enough for me." But Hank, chained by his painfully learned habits, and by something else, could not move. And then a ghostly voice came whispering down the street, chanting, "Fire can hurt me, or water, or the weight of earth, but the dust is my friend." Patrick spared the other man one more look. Then, without a word, he vaulted up and ran off. Hank stood there. After perhaps a half-minute, he remembered to close his mouth when he inhaled. Finally, he was sure the street was empty. As he started to close the window, there was a little mew. He picked up the cat and gently put it outside. Then he did close the window and the shutters, and bolted them, and took up the Geiger counter, and mechanically began to count himself. And that was The Moon is Green by Fritz Lieber. So, yeah, post-apocalyptic radioactive wasteland. And Patrick basically was the straw that broke that poor woman's back. And she, whoop, whoop, she did not take it well. Daily reminder, kids, that radioactive cobalt dust is highly radioactive. It is bad for you. It does a body bad. Um, really bad. Radioactivity in general. Uh, not radioactive material in general, rather, not something to be trifled with. Not one iota. It is nasty stuff. Very nasty stuff. Think about that when you think of nuclear power. Think of that when you think of nuclear power being hailed as being clean. Uh, sure, it's powerful. It's really strong stuff. It can power civilization, but there's only one teensy weensy little itsy bitsy problem, which is the disposal of nuclear waste. Because that shit's pardon my French, that stuff is radioactive for tens of thousands of years. Lethally radioactive, not just like, oh, it'll make a Geiger counter tick a couple times. It'll no 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 no. This is remove you from the gene pool radioactive. This is melt your guts from the inside out. And that is a problem. I mean, what do you do with it? Do you shoot it into space? Shoot it into the sun? Okay. Well, building rockets to do that is kind of expensive because the radioactive waste is usually pretty freaking heavy. Uh, because usually it's in water. It's a lot of it is the water they're using to cool the reactors and keep them from melting down at any given time, and keep their temperature stable. Then you've got spent fuel rods and all that jive, and that stuff is it's a nasty business. It is great and it is powerful and it is a lot of energy, but it is hardly what I would call clean, and certainly not safe, and it just doesn't really work long term. I'm not saying that to sound like some sort of a green freak. Not that there'd be anything wrong with that. I'm saying that more as it's just epistemology. People might say that it's really clean, but you have to wonder, okay, why are you saying it's clean? Are you Are you profiting from the nuclear power situation that we have? In any case, also, nuking the entire world would be bad. So let's not do that, folks. Let's disarm those things. They're just not good. They're just not good to have around. In any case, that is me preaching, and that is done. And I try not to be preachy on that. And I won't preach further. Thanks for tuning in if you tuned in. If you didn't tune in, you probably should. If you're listening to this after the fact, I hope you enjoyed it. I do this every week on Saturdays at noon Eastern Standard Time, which is whatever it is, other time zones. I have no idea. Like 10ish in Mountain or Pacific time. Uh, and then no idea what Europe is. It's sometime in the evening because that's however many hours. Different six depending on where you're at. I also have streams on Monday, my Mecha Mondays stream, and my Warframe Wednesday stream, and those are at the same time. So yeah, feel free to tune in. If you don't, that's fine. I certainly don't hold it against you because, as far as I know, you don't exist. You are a person in potentia. So this month, I'm for this Storytime Saturdays. I'm thinking of doing just short stories for the next couple weeks. Next month, I think I'm going to try doing a actual book, which I'll split into parts. What I'm thinking of doing is a really cool book by a guy called Peter Watts called Blind Sight, which is really, really cool. That one's a lot of fun. It's a bit of a weird one to read, but it doesn't really. It's not super difficult. It flows well. It's a bit. It's a bit shocking, and it's got some interesting highfalutin concepts in there. But I think I hope people will enjoy that. But that's not until next month. So until next week or whenever people want to tune in, this has been Storytime Saturdays, and I have been your narrator, Fraggeth, and thanks for tuning in. Bye.